You know, I have been wanting to add new art prints to my wall, and I've seen a few ads for Heated Rivalry ones, but then I was like, okay, but if I have a print of these two men on my wall, like it's essentially a pinup, I would be no better than a man. Heated Rivalry has taken over the pop culture space and seemingly became a major success practically overnight. Whether you've read the books, seen the show, at the very least, you've heard the name Heated Rivalry. But the success of Heated Rivalry has not been without critique, particularly about the way gay relationships are portrayed, who gets to portray them, and the gatekeeping of this romance by, ironically, straight cis women. So I wanted to dig deeper into these conversations to truly understand why Heated Rivalry is as popular as it is. So in this video, I will be discussing what fiction is, the strengths and weaknesses of the genre, and the question that I think is on a lot of people's minds is why this kind of romance is so appealing to women. So without further ado, hello, welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And today I will be talking about Heated Rivalry. First, as a disclaimer, I am a woman. So obviously, me talking about gay relationships, their dynamics, the hardships that face the gay community, I don't have a lot of credibility because I myself am not a gay man. My only credibility in this video is that I am the target audience for these kinds of romance books. I'm also a casual enjoyer of romance. Listen, Heated Rivalry is a lot of people's first introduction to romance. I was here back in the day when it was two other gay men skating on the ice. Yeah. I'm talking about Yuri on Ice. Don't cite the old text to me, witch. I was there when it was written. Needless to say, I have been a part of the community for a while, and even though I'm not a gay man, I am a bisexual woman. So a lot of the conflicts and critiques that people bring up in regards to romance, even though they're not the same, they can apply to overall the LGBTQ community. And I am drawing from other sources, other videos that content creators have posted to kind of inform my analysis for this video. But of course, if you are a part of the community or in general, you have your own thoughts, please be sure to leave them in the comments below. I'm going to try to be as in-depth as I can, but I'm of course probably going to miss something. So if anyone wants to add on to anything that I'm saying, please feel free to do so. First and foremost, let me get into a brief summary of Heated Rivalry and what it's actually about. So when we talk about Heated Rivalry, a lot of people are referring to the TV show adaptation that was recently released. And just a reminder for everyone, it was not produced by HBO Max. It is distributed by them, but it was actually produced by Crave Canada. So if you want to thank anyone, thank Canada. In the battle between US and Canada, like we're 0 for a million, okay? Everything's better over there. They got universal healthcare, they got Heated Rivalry, like why am I even here? Anyway, so Heated Rivalry was originally a part of a book series called Game Changers. It's book 2, if I'm not mistaken, and it was written by a woman named Rachel Reed. I'm not super familiar with the other books in the series, but I did read Heated Rivalry recently. I have yet to watch the show. And the reason I haven't watched the show is because I live with my family and we got no privacy. The only time my doors close is literally when I'm recording a video. Otherwise, we're very open with each other, which is great and wonderful, but it means that if I want to watch a show as explicit as Heated Rivalry, I gotta do it like in the bathroom, locked door, lights off, headphones on. Like it's already gonna be bad enough because my mom is going to watch this video and then ask me what Heated Rivalry is about, and I'm already preparing for that conversation. I don't need her to see it. I don't. So in Heated Rivalry, the book, it follows our two main characters, Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov. They are pro hockey players on rivaling teams. Their story starts in their teenage years when they first start their careers as two of the most promising hockey players from Canada and Russia, respectively. They start off as rivals, but as the men start interacting with each other over the seasons, something more starts to grow. Let's just say Shane and Ilya start to get more acquainted with each other off the ice. The book then follows their romance and their epic love story as they balance rivalry and mutual attraction. Now, when the book came out in 2019, it already had a very dedicated fan base. Because, and I must point out, because a lot of people are failing to recognize that, this kind of romance is not new. Sports romance isn't new. Hockey specifically romance isn't new. And romance books between two men are not new. Heated Rivalry is a lot of people's first introduction to this genre, but they are wrongfully assuming that it's everyone's first introduction and that it's the first of its kind. And I'm sorry, but that's just not true. And it doesn't take away anything from the success of Heated Rivalry just because it's not the first. It doesn't need to be one of a kind, super unique in order to still be impactful and enjoyable. And that seems to be the hill that a lot of people want to die on. They want to say that Heated Rivalry is amazing, there's nothing else like it, and that's just wrong. Because, believe it or not, part of the reason that this was picked up for a TV show is because it already had a dedicated audience. Crave Canada didn't just pick a book at random and say, let's invest thousands of dollars into making it a TV show and hope it does well. Again, that's not to talk down to anyone that had their first experience be Heated Rivalry, but there's also nothing wrong with acknowledging the path that was paved by the books and stories that came before the show. So yeah, I only say that because that seems to be a very common misconception. And that kind of segues me into the next part of the video where I talk about the problem. See, because while everyone is in this Heated Rivalry cloud, we're all sharing edits with each other, giggling, kicking our feet over the cottage, there's another conversation happening simultaneously. Conversation is putting it lightly. There's a battle online between straight women and gay men. So of course, because Heated Rivalry was so popular, it drew in a bigger audience than maybe anyone ever imagined possible. Which, don't get me wrong, that's very good for everyone involved, and yet, even though it's a blessing, it has also proven to be a curse. Primarily in regards to the discourse that is happening on the internet about who gets to enjoy these shows. As I mentioned before, the primary audience for romance is women. And some women, not all of course, have taken it upon themselves to designate Heated Rivalry as for the girls. Basically, there is a not so small but extremely loud group of women that are blatantly ignoring the critiques of gay men. They're refusing to hear anything that they have to say about, I don't know, stories that literally depict them, and even going so far as to kick men out of bars where they're doing Heated Rivalry watch parties. And now with this newfound appetite for romance, these same women are saying that they will only consume it from other women, going as far to say that men, especially gay men, writing books about their own romances aren't good. That's a lot to take in all at once. So first, let me explain what an romance is. I'm sure you all get the gist. I mean, I've been saying that term throughout most of this video, but right now I'm going to go into more detail about the romance genre and talk about some of the tropes and themes that are in the genre and some of the critiques that come along with it. So is not in fact Madame Morrible Wicked Witch. It stands for male/male fiction. Basically to designate something in shorthand if the two love interests are both men. You can also see a similar designation with FM, meaning female male, and FF, female female. You will also hear this referred to as /fiction, although that term was derived from fan fiction spaces, specifically where you had two male characters, whether it was in a movie or a TV show, that were shipped together even though they weren't together canonically. Some examples include Styles and Derek from Teen Wolf, Steve and Bucky from Captain America and the Avengers, and of course the first /fiction, which was Spock and Kirk from Star Trek. Another version of romance would be BL, which BL stands for boy love, but it's typically used in reference to Asian media such as manga, anime, and webtoons. And the reason BL is often given its own designation separate from romance is because it has a lot of cultural undertones to it. There are certain nuances when it comes to BL literature that are more specific to the Asian culture that isn't exactly the same in romance, for example, in the West. But for the purposes of this video, I will be using as just the blanket term, but when I'm talking about some specific examples, I'll be sure to designate which one I'm talking about. So a lot of romance, as you will come to find out, is actually written by straight women, and typically, if not exclusively, for women. The chief complaint that I've seen with romance on the internet is that even though these stories depict two men in a romantic relationship, they still somehow conform to heteronormative standards. Typically, one half of the pair will be the man of the relationship. They will be depicted as more traditionally masculine, oftentimes taller than their other half. Oftentimes, they're more muscular, they have facial hair, and otherwise, they conform to what we as a society have deemed masculinity to be. Whereas the other person in that pair will be the woman of the relationship. They're usually more petite, kind of like skinny and scrawny, if you will. They're more reserved, shy, and often have feminine mannerisms. This is also a problem and a big critique on the romance genre because it caters to the preconceived notion that a lot of people have when it comes to gay relationships. A lot of times people outside the community don't really understand the dynamics between two men and how their relationship might differ from a heterosexual one. Funny enough, a good example of this critique is in Modern Family. There are two gay characters on the show that are married to each other. Well, they get married later on because technically when the show starts, gay marriage isn't legal. I have to remind myself of that. So they're in a relationship with each other and they have a daughter. And there's an episode that happens early on in the show on Mother's Day, where one of the men is essentially celebrated on Mother's Day. It's Cam. And Cam is really frustrated that he is seen as the woman in their relationship and the mother figure for the sole reason that he is seen as more effeminate than his partner, Mitchell.
Today is your day.
Today.
Yeah, all day.
You're bringing me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day.
Okay, no, this is not a Mother's Day breakfast. This is a breakfast that happens
You think
to be
of me as Lily's mother. I'm your wife. I'm a woman. But they think of me as a woman.
Cam, no, come on. We're just a new type of family. You know, they don't have the right vocabulary for us yet. They need one of us to be the mom.
And oftentimes when it comes to straight people, that's how they look at gay relationships. That's how they're able to understand it in their mind. They are looking for the man and the woman of the relationship. So it's a problem when these romances written by straight women conform to this idea that there has to be a man and a woman in a gay relationship between two men. And of course, one of the biggest criticisms of the genre is that it oftentimes hypersexualizes these relationships. It reduces it to just taboo sex without giving these characters any kind of emotional depth. There was a book that I read and reviewed on my channel previously, and that was Blood of Hercules. I feel like I talk about that book nonstop, but somehow it's always relevant when I'm talking about criticisms for books. In that book, they portray a very famous gay couple in Greek mythology, which is Patroclus and Achilles. See also The Song of Achilles. There's a few other books that I'm blanking on right now, but The Song of Achilles is the big one. And one of the critiques that I had in that video was that any time that they were shown in the book, they were literally just having sex. We never get to hear them talk about their relationship. We don't get any kind of emotional depth with them. They don't have any real emotional connection. Like, these are two people that are supposed to essentially be soulmates and love each other, and yet we never get to see that emotional side of them. They are only portrayed as sexual objects. And in this case, with Blood of Hercules, that book is primarily targeted for women. So to portray a relationship between two men as purely sexual and nothing else, when the lore of these characters is typically that they love each other, is not a very good portrayal of gay characters. And the other critique that I have seen about this genre is that romance often neglects the presence of women, which you might be asking yourself, okay, well, if it's a book about two men in a relationship with each other, like, why would a woman need to be there? Well, the problem is that it seems to be rooted in misogyny, because again, just because they're gay men, they're a part of the LGBTQ community, does not absolve them from being misogynistic. And that is often portrayed in romance, where female characters are often just side characters, or they will be portrayed as the antagonists of the story. So those are the four main points that people bring up when it comes to romance. But let's talk about Heated Rivalry specifically, since that's what this video is about. This is where I'm going to point out that Heated Rivalry the book and Heated Rivalry the TV show are two very different things. Heated Rivalry the show was written and directed by Jacob Tierney, a gay man himself who was able to give his own input into the story. Rachel Reed, as far as I know, is a straight woman. Now, I'm not saying that Heated Rivalry is written poorly. I'm not saying that Rachel Reed is somehow in the wrong for writing this book. I'm not trying to dunk on Rachel Reed. The only thing that I have to point out is that she is not a gay man. So regardless of all the research that she could have done in the lead up to this book, regardless to her expertise in writing, there there is still a very important piece of information that is missing that influences the way that these stories are written and told. She is not a gay man, so she can't draw on any kind of experience that would inform the way that this story is told. And that's not to say that you can't write stories that don't match your perspective. As long as you do your research and listen to people that actually share that identity, you can write a book about pretty much anything. But even with all that effort and all that research, you will still be missing something. You can't perfectly portray that experience because you don't share it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It's just acknowledging where you might fall a little short. Now, what makes or breaks a good story that is told outside of your identity is how close you get to that experience and that portrayal. And the way that you get close enough is, of course, with care, attention to detail, and research. All this to say, I am going to be talking about Heated Rivalry, the book, primarily, and I have nothing against Rachel Reed. I like the book, so I'm gonna just spoil that right now. I'm a fan. But despite being a fan, I did have my own critiques about the book. When I was first reading Heated Rivalry, the first thing I noticed was how repetitive some of the scenes were at the beginning. I'm gonna say the first 30% of the book follows a very similar format where Shane and Ilya would be in the same city, they're playing a game or whatever. They would meet up in a hotel afterwards, have sex, and then say goodbye and do it all over again months later. With these chapters in the beginning of the book, I felt that the focus here was more on the sex, borderline leaning into full-blown erotica, and it really wasn't until the midpoint that we started seeing more of that emotional development. And I understand to a certain extent that the reason that we get all those scenes at the beginning is because they're essentially making it like a slow burn. They're establishing for us as the reader that they're basically friends with benefits. They're still working through their rivalry at the beginning, and it's not until they spend more time with each other and get to know each other that those emotions start to grow, which again, I understand. I just felt like they could have been shortened a little bit. Truly, I don't remember a lot of like what was happening outside the hotel scenes. We didn't get a lot of descriptions of the games itself, who Shane was interacting with outside of Ilya, who Ilya was interacting with. The main focus was the sex scenes. So at the beginning, I was a little worried because it seemed like we were only going to get these men having sex. We weren't going to get to see this emotional side of them. It was essentially just going to be hate f***ing, which again, that plays into the critique of the hypersexualization of gay men for straight women's enjoyment. I think in part, the reason that those scenes are all at the beginning is to again hook the reader and in a way to give them incentive so that they stay long enough to get the emotional payoff of their relationship. I will say that the second half of the book is probably my favorite. I'm not a super big fan of the beginning and all the scenes that we get, just because again, I felt like it was a little repetitive and a little too fan servicey. So that was my biggest problem with Heated Rivalry, the book. But from what I can tell, the show took a different approach to a lot of the source material, and as far as I know, handled it a lot better. And of course, despite the critiques of readers like me and other members of the LGBTQ community, Heated Rivalry was a major success. Not just the publication of the book, but also the TV show adaptation. And knowing that the audience for romance is primarily women, we now ask ourselves, why do they like it so much? So I read a couple of case studies about this, as well as looked at some resources on the internet, videos, other testimonials from people to try to understand what is so appealing about this genre. And there are a few main reasons which I will go into now. First and foremost, entertainment. People just find it entertaining. Personally, I hate this answer. This seems to be the consensus amongst all consumers, and I just find it so vague and unspecific. As someone that literally can't shut their brain off, I'm like, what do you mean it's just entertaining? You don't have anything else to provide besides that? Because my questions would be, what about it is entertaining? What is more entertaining about romance as compared to FF romance or FM romance? So I dug a little deeper, and there are a few other reasons that can hopefully shed more light into this entertaining general answer. In one study, I found another answer that participants provided in a survey of, I believe it was 88 people. They also cited a big reason for enjoying the genre is that it helped them explore their sexual desires and sexual orientation. And what I would argue, it's helping people to explore in a way that is safer than a more hands-on experience, we'll say. Being able to read these stories and interact with them is one way to get exposed to the LGBTQ community. community. And in general, it's a way to explore sex without having to actually be involved in it. But perhaps one of the biggest reasons is the taboo. The forbiddenness of romance seems to span the whole globe. The first slash fiction was written before Stonewall, at a time where the LGBTQ community was dehumanized by not just the government, but everyday citizens. BL originated in Japan and had to be circulated underground to other Asian countries like Thailand, China, and Korea, primarily because of the heavy censorship and stigma. There is even a term in both Japan and China that is used to refer to women that enjoy these kinds of stories that translates, according to this study, to rotten girls. So despite the perceived taboo and stigma about romance, it's also impossible to deny how far we've come as a global society. As I mentioned, I've been a casual enjoyer of romance since my early teen years. And if you'll remember, I mentioned Yuri on Ice, which, if you didn't know, it was an anime created by MAPPA, you know, the studio that developed Jujutsu Kaisen. Yuri on Ice was a major anime, and it was also popular despite being a gay romance. There is one scene in particular that is very famously censored. It's a kissing scene between the two main characters, Victor and Yuri, which people found to be quite obnoxious and outrageous. It's very obviously a love story between two men. What do you mean we don't get to see them kiss? They leave it ambiguous, with Victor's arm covering up Yuri's face so you can't actually see it happen. Because yeah, we could have an anime that surrounds the love story between two men, but seeing them actually kiss would be going too far. That was already a major point of contention in the community 10 years ago when the show came out. So in just that time span, not only do we have a very popular show with two gay characters, but, and this is putting it lightly, they get to do a lot more than kiss. And for a lot of people that enjoy romance or are a part of the LGBTQ community, it's bittersweet. And I say bittersweet because yes, it's a good thing that we are getting more of these stories in the mainstream. It's good to see this representation, but at the same time, this representation is coming from the demand of straight women. The community has come so far, fighting for their rights, fighting for a chance to show off their stories to a wider audience. And it feels like for a lot of people that their voices just weren't strong enough. But the minute that straight women got on board, it's suddenly a major success. It's like the industry doesn't want to hear the stories that come from the actual people that are depicted in them. They only want it when it comes from straight women. So yes, it's a win, but it's also at a cost. But anyway, back to the point at hand. Taboo is one of the big reasons that women seem to like romance. But it's not just defined by these explicit erotic scenes. A big draw for the genre is also the emotional intimacy that is portrayed. And for this section, I will be talking about Borderlands. So Borderlands is a literary theory that basically explains how conflicting identities can challenge social rigidity and norms. Think of it as the intersectionality between seemingly opposing identities. In the original book, it was talking about the US and Mexico and the idea of mestizo and chicano, but the author of the article that I read basically talked about the borderlands between masculinity and emotional vulnerability. A lot of very complicated terms, but in short, it basically describes how romance often depicts these men as being very masculine and encapsulating masculine features while still being romantic and emotionally vulnerable, which is often, sadly enough, not associated with masculinity. It portrays masculinity in a way that we don't often see in traditional media, which I think is only heightened because of the book format. Because you are literally inside these characters' minds, you get to see the emotional side of men that we are often denied. Because society has told us that true masculine men don't feel these emotions. At the very least, they don't show them. And I'm sorry, but this is the female gaze. The women yearn for men who emote. The female gaze is quite literally emotional vulnerability. We have not given men the ability and freedom to express their emotions because our society does not value emotions. Those are not essential to being a man. Which again, this is more indicative of us as a greater society and the expectations that we have set for masculinity, which I don't think it's any one person's fault for the way that masculinity has been portrayed, but like, who set that system up? So in romance, where you get to see this emotional side, it of course appeals to women. Now, this is not to say that men can't write emotional depth in their own characters. If anything, I think it's more of an internal roadblock, something that a lot of male writers have to overcome. They themselves have had to experience what society expects masculinity to be. These men may find that they struggle to portray male characters that have emotional depth because they themselves have not been allowed that freedom to express their own emotions and feel their feelings. This is not a critique on male authors. I think anyone that writes a book has something to overcome when they do it. For example, in my experience, one of the biggest problems I have with romance books that are written by women is that oftentimes the endings still conform to societal expectations for women. A lot of the books usually end with the women getting married and having kids, as if that's the only possible happy ending for two people in a relationship. Another problem, and one that I've spoken about before, is that oftentimes in these romances, there are unexpected pregnancies. The books don't even entertain the idea of an abortion or any kind of other option besides having the kid. See, prime example, It Ends With Us, which again, that is also conforming to societal expectations of femininity and what it means to be a woman. So I love the kind of romance books that don't conform to that challenge those ideas. So there is a lot that people have to overcome when they write books. And in a lot of ways, it does have to deal with what society has outlined as masculine and feminine. So when it comes to romance, it is often a place where men can exist outside of traditional masculinity. And even though these relationships don't apply to the primarily female audience, it can be healing in a lot of ways to see this more positive view of masculinity. And now I'm going to give my reason why I think I personally enjoy romance, something that I don't know if a lot of people can relate to, but I'm gonna just throw this out there. When it comes to romance, I think I can really sum it up as gender envy. When you have a relationship between a man and a woman, there is already an inequality. This is a different day. My camera died, so I had to continue this now. There's been no gap in time for you, but just to refresh my own memory, I think the last thing I said was that my personal reason for liking romance is because I have gender envy. Of course, when you go into a relationship, you have to take into account the gender dynamics, and more often than not, just because of our society, men and women are not on equal footing. I think that oftentimes when women get into relationships, the end goal or end product is to get married and have children. And that is something that is not only in the mind of the woman in the relationship, but whoever she is in a relationship with. So oftentimes I think that is where we are restricted in relationships. Whereas in romance, like there is no ticking time bomb. Maybe that's not the right way to, I'm sorry, maybe that's not an appropriate term to refer to a woman's biological clock, right? But that's kind of what it feels like. In a lot of ways, we're going to trauma bond for a second. As it's been described to me, I have an expiration date as a woman. As I've been told, it is when you hit 30 years old. After 30, again, to quote someone that told me this to my face, after you turn 30, no one will want you. That's not a thing in romance because there is no procreation on the line. Again, the way that I'm referring to this is not great. Unfortunately, that's just like a very direct and blunt way to describe the phenomena that is being a woman and trying to date and find a partner. We have that nifty little biological clock that everyone besides you seems to be very aware and conscious of. In an romance, you don't have to worry about those things per se. It of course comes with its own challenges, but it is very different to the challenge of being a woman in a relationship, particularly in a straight relationship. When it comes to women in relationships, I feel like women oftentimes in fiction and real life don't get to exist outside the identity of being a mother and a wife. There's a lot of sacrifice, I feel, when it comes to being a woman in a relationship. relationship, and it's a sacrifice that I don't often see in romance. You never have to give up a part of yourself to be in that relationship. Recently, I read People We Meet on Vacation, and if you don't know what that book is about, it's basically a manic pixie dream girl main character that has wanderlust. Like, she travels the world perpetually, and her best friend is a homebody. He's very introverted, and his main goal in life is to settle down in the suburbs, have a wife and a few kids. And not to go too in depth into that book, but as I was reading it, I couldn't help feeling such dread, because I'm like, this woman who gets to see the world for her job, she's successful, she's making a lot of money, she's an influencer, she's living in the city, she has it all, and she's going to give it up to be this man's wife. Not that that is a bad thing for her or a bad thing for anyone to choose, but it's like she would have to sacrifice that in order to have him. And that sacrifice is not something that you see in romance, I feel, in my opinion. I feel similarly to Icebreaker, which is another big romance book. In that book, the main character is a pro ice skater. I know, ironic, also in the ice skating athletic field. So she's a pro figure skater, and her love interest is a hockey player. And I hate the epilogue of that book because she was on her way to the Olympics and gets pregnant. Her whole career gets derailed while she has to sit at home. And I think there's a line in the book that references that her partner is a massive dude, so she had to push out this massive baby and basically put her career on hold while her, I think, fiance at the time gets to play for the NHL. He gets to go win the Stanley Cup and have his career, while this woman who was supposed to go to the Olympics now has to wait. That saddens me because it's not a choice then. She got pregnant and it was like, okay, well, she has to have the baby. There's no other option to that. In People We Meet on Vacation, it's like, okay, there's no reality in which you finish a romance book and the two main people don't end up together. She was gonna have to sacrifice something. And I'm not saying that that's how the book ends. I actually prefer the way the book ends compared to what I was anticipating. But that's kind of the vibe when it comes to straight romance, is that the woman often has to give something up, and it's always a part of herself. It's always the part that exists outside of femininity, outside of what society deems a woman should be. It's giving up her career, giving up her passions, her desires, her dreams. But in romance, you don't see that because it's never expected that one person has to give up something in order to be in the relationship. Again, it has its own trials and tribulations and it has its own struggles, but it's very different. That's also why I like this book, because it's rivals to lovers, and I am finding that I really enjoy rivals because in order for that trope to work, you have to see each other at the same level. You have a mutual respect for that person because you acknowledge that they are competition. In this book, Shane and Ilya are both like some of the best hockey players in the league. They acknowledge each other's talents, their strength, their skills, and that's why their rivalry is so intense, and they're constantly pushing each other to be at the top of their game. That is so attractive to me, to find someone that is literally pushing you to be the best version of yourself that you can be. But that's just my personal opinion. Those are my reasons for reading romance. I don't think everyone feels that way. Maybe that says more about my own personal trauma and things that I have gone through as a person. But you know what? We don't have to talk about that, at least not now. But continuing on with the main point of the video, why is it a problem if women like romance? Because I just admitted that I like romance, so how could it possibly be bad? Because if you know me, I'm always right. So if I say romance is right and okay to enjoy, then surely it is. I'm just kidding. Someone will take that out of context. I'm not always right. Just frequently. Well, the problem is that more often than not, as we've already established, romance is written by straight women. It's also mainly consumed by straight women. And the problem is that these women that are enjoying this romance only enjoy it if it's written by other women. There seems to be a distrust in men, and specifically gay men, as if they are inept at writing books about queer relationships. Now, first issue is that that line of thinking is more often than not rooted in homophobia. And what you'll find, which is kind of ironic, is that a lot of women that enjoy this romance are actually wildly homophobic in practice because they like the relationships in theory. They like it when they're able to project onto the more feminine half of the pair, but they don't actually approve of it, which is a problem because in private, they will love to watch two men having sex sex on TV. But they'll never do anything to try to make the world a safer place for the real people that are being depicted in these TV shows and in these books. And this is a common criticism that queer men are bringing up about romance. They want the gays without their struggle. They want the eye candy. They want the little dog in their purse. And they don't want to think about these people beyond that. They don't want to see them as three-dimensional. They don't want to see their struggles. They don't want to see how the world is pitted against them. That's not to say that everyone that enjoys romance has that same mentality, but it's more than you think. The cognitive dissonance to enjoy romance and still be homophobic is a case study, truly. But I assure you, those people exist. And it's a spectrum, of course. Sure, you'll find some women that are raging homophobics. And then on the lighter side of the spectrum, you will find women that are trying to claim Heated Rivalry as for the girlies and actively gatekeeping it from other gay men. And you know, there is something to be said about queer men writing romance. As I mentioned earlier, there is a non-zero percentage of women that will consume romance but refuse to consume it from other men, which is of course a problem because we are taking space away from the actual people that are depicted in these stories and not giving them the space to add more depth, add their own perspective and experiences to these stories that would arguably enrich the genre and make it all that more entertaining and enjoyable. And we're instead taking those opportunities away from this community and giving it to cis straight women. It's a tale as old as time. I'm not surprised, but I am still disgusted that this is even something that we entertain. There are an embarrassing amount of posts on the internet from women being like, okay, well, if there are good romances written by gay men, name them. I'm not the best person to speak on this because in general, I don't read a ton of romance, so I don't have a lot of recs, but I'm like, guys, Aristotle and Dante discover the secrets of the universe. It literally won a prize in literature, and it's a beautiful love story between two boys. Get out of here. If you think there are no good romances written by men, I'm sorry, you have not seen the literary world outside of TikTok. You haven't gone more than 20 feet into a Barnes & Noble if you think these books don't exist. It's not even that you have to dig. It's a simple Google search. Personally, some of my favorite books, and these aren't exclusively romance, but they do depict gay relationships. Aristotle and Dante, one of my favorite books of all time. Cemetery Boys, and of course they both die at the end. You can't see it, but I have the entire collection on my top shelf. So I'm sorry, but if you can't find these books written by actual gay people, that's a you problem, not a me problem. Work on it and then come back. I would say the main problem with romance being so popular is that it's ironic because it still decenters gay men from stories that are literally about them, because you have these books that are written by women that are made for women and then adapted into TV shows that then cater to women, which it's not entirely women's fault. It's just that if you look at any area of industry or whatever, typically women are the main consumers everywhere. We're the ones buying the cars, buying the appliances, buying clothes. We dominate consumer markets. That's not just books. Oftentimes, it is also TV shows and movies that are made with a feminine audience in mind. It's not entirely the consumer's fault, but these problems just feed into each other because obviously these studios want to make money. So they'll adapt the books that are popular. And because these books cater to women, of course, they're going to read more and more. It's a never-ending cycle that unfortunately keeps growing, and with its growth, it is pushing out the queer community. And that's not just gay men, but also lesbian stories. Because yes, oftentimes when we talk about romance, we have to also acknowledge that with its popularity, more often than not, these stories, TV shows, books, whatever, that center lesbian relationships get canceled or are killed in development because they are not seen as profitable or entertaining enough as romance. The only times that queer romances get wildly popular, if it's not exclusively romance, is if it's a tragedy. Like, we only want to see them struggle and we only want to see brutal homophobia. It's a problem that expands into a lot of different genres in television, movies, any kind of media. And we don't often give these communities a lot of room to just experience pure joy. And I will say the last and probably most extreme problem with the popularity of romance is that some women are heavily over-sexualizing gay men to the point that they are so delusional that they think they have a chance with the actors of Heated Rivalry and have begun harassing them. They want to take these real people, smash their faces together, and say, "Kiss," over and over for my entertainment. They want these two actors to perpetually be these characters and don't give them any kind of room to grow outside of Heated Rivalry. Heated Rivalry is great. I'm not saying it's not. But these are real people with real lives. You know, it's one thing to enjoy the occasional edit, maybe to have a folder. I have a folder. I'm not ashamed. Don't ask me to show it though, because it's a little embarrassing. But you know, we're all human. They're very good looking people. I can understand. But to bully, to harass, to think that you have some kind of claim on these actors, crazy. This is a critique on romance as much as it is a critique on society, because everywhere in every industry, in every hobby or whatever, you will find weirdos that take it to a weird extreme. But I do want to mention it because it is a problem, and I can only imagine how much these actors will be able to take before eventually we're gonna get a post from them saying, "Hey, a lot of you people are acting very weird, so now I have to get off of social media, and you're gonna ruin it for the rest of us." So to wrap up the video, Heated Rivalry has gained a lot of traction in the public eye. And while it's bringing this genre of romance into the spotlight, it's also bringing up this difficult conversation about the problems within the genre, the audience, who gets to make these stories and why. But make no mistake, just because the conversation is now coming to light for people doesn't mean that we haven't been having this conversation. It's not new, and it's not going to end with just this TV show. Now, no one's saying you can't enjoy Heated Rivalry, or even that straight women can't write romance. What I am saying is that gay men and the LGBTQ community has a right to be frustrated. They have a right to voice their grievances and critique not only Heated Rivalry, but the genre as a whole. So with this conversation and everything that's been going on the internet, you might be asking, what's the solution? Who's right and what do we do about it? I don't think it's a clear-cut answer of who's right and who's wrong, but there is a right way to move forward from this conversation, which is read more gay romance written by gay men. It's truly that simple. Now that you've been introduced to the genre, great. Welcome to the community. Expand your horizons. Don't stop at Heated Rivalry. Don't even stop at the Game Changers series. Discover a new book series. I'm sure there will be a lot more recs with the popularity of Heated Rivalry. Explore, talk about these other books that you're interested in, and be an advocate for the LGBTQ community, because you don't get to enjoy these stories and then sabotage these people in real life. Because I bet you're watching Heated Rivalry and you want Ilya and Shane to have a happy ending, right? But imagine if gay marriage wasn't legal, which canonically it wasn't when the book series starts in like 2009. Yeah, that would suck, right? It's a good thing that in real life, gay marriage is legal. And therefore, canonically, because the series takes place in some version of the real world, after 2016, Shane and Ilya can get married. Isn't that wonderful? Don't we want to keep that going? Yeah. That's pretty much everything I wanted to say about romance. Initially, when I came up with the title of this video, The Global Ramifications of Heated Rivalry, I thought I was going to make like a funny little video talking about the history of the conflict between Russia and Canada in hockey. Originally, I was going to talk about that. I was going to talk about hockey and how there's a whole other conversation about how hockey romance is oftentimes a vehicle for white supremacy because the NHL is not very diverse. It's a lot of white people. And I was just going to lightly talk about my hockey knowledge because I did not get into one of the most traumatic relationships of my life at 17 with someone who was obsessed with hockey for me to not pull out this information. Like, I know what a hat trick is. How am I ever going to bring that up in conversation other than a hockey romance video? Just know that I know what that is. It is when a single player scores more than 3 goals in a single game. Or is it 3 goals exactly? I'm not going to look it up. I'm pretty confident, at least like 70% confident. It's been a while, okay? I blocked out that period of time in my life for reasons, mainly trauma. So with that, that's the end of my video. I didn't think that I was gonna make this video about romance and the controversy, but I saw a lot of videos coming up and I thought that my time would be more well spent by actually contributing to this conversation, kind of making a general video about all the points that people are bringing up to, again, bring light to this conversation in a way that I hope is more constructive. Because yeah, Heated Rivalry is fun and all, and I'm enjoying the edits, I'm enjoying the content, but that content doesn't exist in a vacuum, and we have to acknowledge the unfortunate world around it. And it would be a disservice to not talk about this and not talk about the problems within the LGBTQ community and the genuine criticisms that people are bringing up when it comes to Heated Rivalry and the romance genre. But with that, that's the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know your thoughts down below if you've watched Heated Rivalry, what you think about romance. If you have any recommendations, please be sure to leave them down below. You can also follow me on all my social media at Listen to Kristen on TikTok, Instagram, and Goodreads. And I think that's about it for me today. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. I completely forgot that they were over here. Oh my God. And now that I've made my review, I can actually watch Heated Rivalry. So I'll let you know what I think.